The moment that stopped him cold there backstage was thick with excitement, laughter, and flashing lights. Everyone was celebrating another successful Hollywood award night. The sound of applause still echoed faintly through the heavy curtains. But Keanu Reeves stood a few steps away from the crowd, his eyes searching quietly through the busy room. Something didn't feel right. He had seen Sandra Bullock walk off stage just minutes earlier with her usual bright smile. But there had been something different in her eyes, something he couldn't ignore. As he moved through the backstage corridor, he passed crew members packing up cables, actors chatting loudly, and assistants rushing with headsets. Then he saw her sitting alone near the corner of the dressing room hallway, shoulders trembling. Her hands covered her face, and the golden stage light from outside flickered faintly across her hair. It was Sandra. Keanu froze for a second. The image didn't fit the woman he knew. Sandra was always the strong one, the one who made others laugh even when she was hurting. Seeing her cry felt wrong, like watching the sun fall from the sky. Quietly, he walked closer. "Sandra?" he said softly. She didn't look up at first. He waited, patient as always, his voice calm. When she finally lifted her face, her eyes were red, her makeup slightly smudged. She tried to smile, but it broke halfway. "Hey," she whispered, "sorry. I didn't want anyone to see this." Keanu knelt beside her. "Then it's a good thing I'm not just anyone," he said with a small smile. She laughed weakly. "You always know how to make things sound better." He didn't ask why she was crying right away. He just sat beside her on the cold floor, back against the wall, the noise of the party far behind them. Silence filled the space between them, not awkward silence, but the kind that makes people feel safe enough to be real. After a long moment, she spoke. "It was the joke. The joke." She nodded. "On stage, when that presenter made fun of me, I smiled because I had to, but it hurt. I've spent years trying to be strong, trying to be taken seriously, and still people think I'm just some pretty face from old comedies. I know it's silly to cry about it, but it just hit me tonight." Keanu's face softened. "It's not silly," he said. "Being strong doesn't mean pretending you don't feel." She looked at him, eyes filled with both gratitude and pain. "You're the only one who ever says things like that, you know? Everyone else tells me to brush it off." He shook his head. "You don't need to brush it off. You need to remember who you are. And trust me, you've earned more than their cheap jokes." She smiled faintly, wiping her tears. "Why are you always like this?" "Like what?" he asked, so kind, so calm. "It's like nothing gets to you." Keanu looked away, his eyes distant. "Because I know what it's like to hurt quietly. Sometimes you just learn to keep walking." His words hung in the air. Sandra didn't ask what he meant, but she could feel there was a story behind it, a weight he never talked about. After a moment, Keanu stood and offered her his hand. "Come on," he said gently. "Let's get out of here for a bit." She hesitated. "Where?" "Anywhere but here." She took his hand, and they slipped out a side door, leaving the sound of laughter and champagne behind. The night outside was cool, the city lights soft against the dark sky. They walked in silence for a while until Sandra finally whispered, "You always know when to show up." He smiled. "That's what friends are for." She stopped walking then and looked at him, her eyes glistening under the streetlights. "No," she said softly. "That's what good souls do for a long time." They stood there, two people surrounded by fame and noise, but connected by something far quieter: understanding. Keanu didn't try to fix her pain. He didn't tell her to move on. He simply stood beside her, letting her know she wasn't alone. As the cold night wind brushed against their faces, Sandra finally took a deep breath and said, "Thank you, Keanu. You didn't have to come after me." He looked at her and replied, "Yes, I did. Because sometimes, when the world is loud, someone needs to remind you that you're more than what they say." That night, Keanu didn't go back to the party. Neither did Sandra. They sat at a small cafe nearby, talking about life, loss, and the strange loneliness that fame brings. It wasn't about fixing things, it was about feeling human again. What Keanu didn't realize then was that this one act of compassion, this simple decision to follow a friend's pain instead of applause, would soon melt the hearts of millions once the truth of that night came to light. Asterisk. When the world found out the next morning, Sunlight poured gently through Sandra's apartment windows. She sat on her couch, her hands wrapped around a cup of coffee, her eyes distant. The night before replayed in her mind like a slow movie, the lights, the laughter, the cruel joke, and then Keanu's quiet voice in the dark, reminding her she was more than what they said. Her phone buzzed constantly. Messages from friends, from her team, from reporters wanting comments about the award show. She didn't answer any of them. Not yet. Meanwhile, Keanu woke in his small, simple home far from Hollywood's noise. He had turned off his phone before bed, but when he finally switched it on, hundreds of notifications flooded the screen. His name was everywhere. One picture had gone viral. Someone from Backstage had snapped a photo of him kneeling beside Sandra, holding her hand as she wiped her tears. No words, no context. Just a quiet moment of kindness frozen in time. The internet erupted. "This is the kind of man the world needs. Keanu comforting Sandra backstage broke me." He didn't chase cameras. He chased a friend's pain. Millions shared the photo, and for once, the comments weren't cruel. They were full of warmth, respect, even tears. People saw something in that image that the world had been missing: decency. When Sandra saw the photo, her breath caught. She wasn't embarrassed, she was moved. The world had witnessed her most vulnerable moment, yet instead of judgment, there was empathy. And it was because of the man beside her. Still, not everyone was kind. Some tabloids twisted the story, claiming something romantic had sparked between them. Headlines screamed, "Keanu and Sandra's secret moment backstage." Others called it staged, saying it was a publicity move. By noon, her agent called in a panic. "Sandra, we need to make a statement. The gossip sites are out of control." She sighed. "No, not yet." "But no," she said again, firmer this time. "Sometimes the truth doesn't need noise." Meanwhile, Keanu was having a similar conversation with his own manager. "You should clear this up," the manager insisted. "People are writing stories." Keanu shook his head. "If I speak, it becomes about me. If I stay quiet, maybe it stays about kindness." Later that evening, Sandra decided to visit him. She drove quietly through the city, sunglasses on, avoiding the photographers who now waited outside her gate. When Keanu opened the door, he looked surprised but calm. "As always, you've seen it?" she asked, stepping inside. "Yeah," he said softly. "The world has a lot to say about one picture." She gave a small laugh. "Seems like they always do." They sat in his kitchen, sharing tea in silence for a while. Finally, Sandra looked at him and said, "You could have ignored me last night, walked away. Nobody would have blamed you." Keanu looked down at his cup. "I couldn't. When someone's hurting, you don't think about what people will say. You just show up." She nodded, her eyes glistening again. "The world saw something beautiful because you didn't care about being seen." His smile was quiet but genuine. "I guess the world needed a reminder that kindness still exists for a few days." The noise grew louder. Interviews, talk shows, social media trends, everyone wanted a piece of the story. But Keanu refused to talk about it. He didn't post, didn't appear, didn't give a soundbite. Sandra stayed silent too. And in that silence, the story took on a life of its own, one that wasn't built on gossip but gratitude. Teachers used the image in classrooms to talk about empathy. One little girl wrote on her school board, "I want to be kind like Keanu." Hospitals printed the photo on bulletin boards with the caption, "Be there for someone today." The moment had become more than a story, it was a movement. One night, Keanu scrolled quietly through the comments people had written. There were thousands, each one a piece of humanity trying to shine through the noise. He paused on one message from a single mother who wrote, "Thank you for showing my son what real strength looks like." He leaned back in his chair and whispered to himself, "If this helped even one person, then it was worth it." The next day, Sandra called him again. "You know, we could use this moment," she said. "Do something good with it. What do you have in mind? Let's turn it into kindness. Maybe a small project, something for people who feel invisible." Keanu smiled softly. "Then let's do it." Neither of them knew it yet, but what started as a quiet act backstage was about to grow into something far bigger, something that would reach hearts across the world and prove that, even in the loudest times, love and empathy still had a voice. The Kindness Project world couldn't stop talking about that one picture of Keanu and Sandra. Weeks passed, yet it kept resurfacing on every social platform, every talk show, every news site. But behind the scenes, something much quieter and far more meaningful was beginning. Keanu and Sandra started meeting in secret, not for movies or interviews, but for an idea. They met in small cafes, parks, and even in Keanu's garage where the noise of Hollywood couldn't reach. They wanted to do something real, something that mattered beyond headlines. People are tired, Sandra said one evening as they sat surrounded by notebooks. Tired of gossip, tired of cruelty, tired of pretending everything is fine. We can't fix the world, but maybe we can remind it to care again. Keanu nodded, his eyes thoughtful. A kindness project, he said softly. Something that helps people help each other. They decided to create a simple movement, no big banners, no famous names, no sponsors. Just a message, one small act of kindness can change a life. The first step was to set up an online page. They didn't even put their names on it. Instead, it was titled The Quiet Room. The idea was simple. People could share real stories of kindness times they helped someone, or when someone helped them. Every week, they would highlight one story and send a small donation to the person who inspired it. Not as charity, but as gratitude. Within days, the stories began to pour in. A taxi driver who drove a lost child home without asking for money. A teenage boy who bought food for a homeless man using his lunch savings. A nurse who sang softly to her patients at night when they couldn't sleep. Keanu read each story carefully, often with tears in his eyes. These people, he said one night, they're the real heroes. Not us, Sandra smiled, maybe. But they needed someone to start it, soon. Word began to spread that the Quiet Room had something to do with Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock, though neither confirmed it. Fans guessed, reporters asked questions, but the two remained silent. They didn't want credit, they wanted people to listen. But not everyone saw it with good intentions. Some media outlets mocked the project, calling it a celebrity guilt trend. One headline read, Keanu and Sandra's fake kindness movement. Sandra saw it first. She showed the article to Keanu, her voice tight. They'll twist even this. He looked at her calmly. Let them. We know what's real. That night, Sandra sat alone in her home, reading through news stories submitted by strangers. One caught her attention. A woman named Maria wrote about losing her husband and being comforted by a kind stranger at a bus stop who simply sat with her and said, You're not alone. Maria ended her story with, He reminded me that the world still has light, even in the dark. Those words hit Sandra deeply. She called Keanu immediately. We should meet her, she said. Keanu didn't hesitate. Let's go. A few days later, they met Maria quietly at a small diner outside the city. She was shy, gentle, with eyes that had seen pain but still carried warmth. She told them how she had found the Quiet Room and how it helped her start believing in people again. I don't have much, Maria said, but I started leaving notes for strangers, little messages that say things like you matter, or thank you for being kind. And sometimes, people write back. Keanu's eyes softened. That's beautiful, he said quietly. You turned pain into peace. When they left the diner, Sandra whispered, This is what it's about. Keanu, it's not fame. It's this, he nodded. The moment we remind one person they're not alone, it's already worth it. But as the Quiet Room grew, so did the pressure. Brands wanted to sponsor it, talk shows wanted exclusive interviews, and fans demanded confirmation. Still, Keanu and Sandra said nothing. Their silence became their strength. Then one evening, during a charity event, a reporter cornered Keanu on the red carpet. Is it true you and Sandra are behind the Quiet Room? Keanu paused, looking at the cameras flashing all around him. He could have said no. He could have walked away. Instead, he smiled gently and said, It doesn't matter who started it. What matters is that people are helping each other again. His words went viral again. Millions shared the clip, calling it the most humble response ever. But not everyone realized that behind that humble answer, Keanu and Sandra were still carrying their own battles, pain, loneliness, and the fear that even good intentions could be misunderstood. And as the movement grew larger than either of them expected, Something unexpected was about to happen, an act that would test Keanu's heart in a way he never saw coming. The night everything changed. The quiet room was no longer quiet. Within months, it had become a global movement. Schools used it to teach empathy, offices used it to improve teamwork, and hospitals played its message in waiting rooms. People were smiling more, forgiving more, and seeing the world differently. It had turned into something neither Keanu nor Sandra had planned. It had become hope. But fame, even when born from kindness, always finds its way back to noise. One night, during a charity gala dedicated to raising funds for the quiet room, things took an unexpected turn. Keanu arrived early, dressed simply, avoiding the red carpet. He preferred the back doors, the quiet corners. Sandra joined him later, glowing as always, her laughter soft but genuine. The event was filled with warm stories of ordinary people doing extraordinary things. For a few hours, it felt perfect, until a journalist asked a question that sliced through the peace. During the live broadcast, a young reporter stood up and said loudly, "Keanu, you say the quiet room isn't about fame, but isn't it convenient that your name is behind it? Is this another Hollywood performance?" The room went silent. The air grew heavy. Everyone turned to Keanu. Sandra's face froze in shock. The reporter's words weren't just harsh, they were cruel. Keanu didn't move for a few seconds. His jaw tightened slightly, his eyes calm but sad. Then he took the microphone, his voice quiet yet clear. "You know," he said slowly, "I didn't start this because I wanted people to look at me. I started it because I saw someone I care about cry backstage one night, and I realized the world had forgotten how to listen. If that's what a performance is, then maybe we all need to act a little kinder." The room erupted in applause. Sandra's eyes filled with tears. But Keanu wasn't finished. "The truth is," he continued, "you don't need to be rich or famous to make someone's day better. You just need to care. That's all the quiet room ever meant, to be a place where caring isn't forgotten." The reporter lowered her head, embarrassed. Sandra reached out and gently touched Keanu's arm. The cameras caught that moment, a man who spoke with humility, and a woman whose eyes said everything words couldn't. After the event, Sandra found him sitting outside, away from the noise again. "You handled that beautifully," she said softly. Keanu shrugged lightly. "I just said what was true, and that's exactly why people love you," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "I don't want them to love me, Sandra. I just want them to love each other." She looked at him, eyes filled with quiet admiration. "You know, sometimes I think you were born to remind people what goodness looks like." He laughed softly. "If I can remind even one person, it's enough." But as the night went on, Keanu began to notice something else. People were talking about him again, not the project. His speech was being quoted, edited, and turned into headlines. "Keanu saves the show. Keanu, the hero of kindness." The focus was shifting back to him. And that wasn't what he wanted. Later that night, as he drove home alone through the quiet streets of Los Angeles, he felt a strange ache in his chest. He had spent years trying to live simply, away from attention. And now the world was shining its brightest light on him again, when all he had ever wanted was for that light to fall on others. When he reached home, his phone buzzed with messages, thousands of them. But one stood out. It was from a young man who wrote, "I was going to end my life tonight. Then I heard what you said about kindness. I changed my mind. Thank you." Keanu stared at the message, his eyes softening. He whispered quietly to himself, "Then it was worth it." The next day, he met Sandra again, this time at a small cafe by the beach. She brought him coffee, and they sat watching the waves crash gently against the shore. "You changed someone's life last night," she said. "Maybe," he replied softly, "but it's not about me. It's about reminding people they matter." She nodded. "The world listens to you because you don't speak to be heard, you speak to heal." He smiled, looking at the horizon. "Then maybe that's what we should keep doing, healing quietly." Sandra tilted her head, curious. "What do you mean?" "Let's step back," he said. "No cameras, no interviews. Let the quiet room live on its own. People don't need our names to believe in kindness." She thought about it, then nodded slowly. "You're right. Sometimes the loudest message comes from silence." And so, once again, Keanu disappeared from the spotlight. No statements, no speeches, no interviews. Just quiet. But what he didn't know was that his silence would speak louder than any words he had ever said. Because soon, the quiet room would take on a life of its own, reaching places even he couldn't imagine, and touching hearts in ways that would forever prove that one small act of compassion can change the world. The silence that spoke louder than words weeks passed after the charity event, and just like Keanu wanted, he and Sandra both stepped away from the spotlight. No interviews, no cameras, no public appearances. They simply vanished into the quiet. Yet, in their silence, the quiet room grew stronger than ever. It began spreading to schools in small towns, to hospitals in rural areas, to shelters where people had lost everything but hope. The stories kept pouring in, thousands of them. A soldier who comforted a scared child in a war zone. A teacher who bought shoes for her students. A little boy who saved his lunch money to feed stray dogs. And none of them mentioned Keanu or Sandra. They didn't need to. It had become something pure, something bigger than both of them. One morning, Keanu sat in his small backyard, a cup of coffee in hand, the sun barely rising. He looked at the peaceful sky and thought about how strange it was. That silence, something people feared, had turned into the loudest message of his life. His phone buzzed. It was Sandra. "You up?" she texted. "Yeah," he replied. "Come over. You need to see something." He drove to her house quietly, avoiding the main roads. When he arrived, Sandra opened the door with an excited smile. "Comin'," she said, handing him her tablet. "Look at this." On the screen was a video, grainy, shot by someone on an old phone. It showed a small group of kids standing in a playground, painting a wall. On the wall, in bright colors, they had written, "Be kind. Be human." The quiet room. Beneath the video, a caption read, "Our school started this project after hearing about Keanu Reeves and Sandra Bullock's kindness movement. We just want to make people smile." Keanu watched the video silently. At the end, one little girl looked into the camera and said, "Thank you, Mr. Keanu. You made the world a little softer." He felt his throat tighten. "They shouldn't thank me," he said softly. Sandra smiled. "They're not thanking the actor. They're thanking the man who reminded them to care." For a while, they just sat there in silence. The sound of birds outside mixed with the faint hum of the city. Finally, Sandra said, "You know what I realized?" "What?" "You changed the world without trying to. Not with big speeches or movies, just by being you." He smiled gently. "Maybe we all can, if we just listen." The following week, they decided to travel together to see how far the quiet room had reached. No press, no schedules, just two friends chasing kindness across the world. Their first stop was a children's hospital in Seattle. Nurses had decorated the walls with drawings inspired by the quiet room. One nurse told them, "The kids love it. They write notes to each other every day. It helps them stay brave." Keanu's eyes glistened as he read one of the notes pinned to a wall. It said, "Dear Emma, don't be scared. I will be your friend until you go home." He turned to Sandra. "This," he said softly, "is what real success looks like." They continued to visit small communities, places untouched by fame. Each time, they met people who had been inspired by the message of kindness. Farmers, teachers, shopkeepers, even prisoners. One man in a rehabilitation center said, "Your project gave me a reason to try again. I started helping others instead of hurting myself." Keanu didn't reply at first. He simply placed a hand on the man's shoulder and whispered, "You already changed your story." That night, as they sat in a quiet diner eating soup, Sandra said, "Do you ever think about how it all started?" Keanu smiled faintly. "A cruel joke, a few tears, and a choice." "Yeah," she said. "You chose compassion when you could have chosen comfort." He looked at her, his voice low. "Maybe that's what the world really needs, people who show up when it's inconvenient." They sat for a long time, listening to the hum of the diner, watching strangers laugh, talk, and smile. It was ordinary, but to them, it felt like magic. A few weeks later, Keanu got a letter in the mail. It was from Maria, the woman they had met months earlier at the diner, the widow who started leaving notes for strangers. Her letter said, "People now leave their own notes next to mine. Sometimes I come back and find 10 new ones. I think we started something unstoppable. Keanu folded the letter carefully and placed it in his jacket pocket. Unstoppable, he murmured. I like that word. By then, the world had begun calling the quiet room the kindest revolution. Schools hosted kindness weeks. People wrote songs about empathy, and for the first time in years, social media was filled with stories that made people cry for the right reasons. But through it all, Keanu and Sandra stayed out of the spotlight. They didn't need it. They had learned that real change doesn't happen in front of cameras, it happens in hearts. And just when they thought their journey had reached its end, one message arrived that would change everything again. It was a short video from a child in a refugee camp overseas. The little boy, barefoot and smiling, looked into the camera and said, "Mr. Keanu, I made my own quiet room. It's here, in my heart." Keanu watched it again and again, tears filling his eyes. He turned to Sandra and whispered, "That's it. That's what it was always meant to be." The room that lived forever. The video of the little boy in the refugee camp stayed in Keanu's mind for days. His small voice, soft but full of light, echoed every time Keanu closed his eyes. "I made my own quiet room. It's here, in my heart." Those words were simple, yet they carried everything Keanu had ever hoped the movement would mean. Kindness without walls, peace without boundaries, compassion that needed no fame. He showed the video to Sandra when she visited his home one morning. She watched it quietly, her hands pressed against her mouth, her eyes glistening. "He understands," she whispered. "Yeah," Keanu said softly. "He really does." For a moment, they both sat there in silence, letting the emotion settle. Then Sandra smiled faintly. "You know what this means?" "What?" "We did it. It's no longer ours. It belongs to the world now." Keanu nodded. "And that's exactly how it should be." In the months that followed, the quiet room became something more than a movement. It became a symbol. People began painting murals of open doors, leaving benches in parks labeled for anyone who needs to sit and be heard, and organizing kindness circles in cities across the world. Strangers met, shared their stories, and left a little piece of hope behind. No one talked about who started it anymore. The names of Keanu and Sandra faded quietly into the background, replaced by everyday heroes, nurses, teachers, children, workers, each one carrying the torch of compassion forward. Keanu and Sandra kept traveling in secret, sometimes visiting those places quietly, blending into crowds, smiling from a distance. They didn't reveal who they were. They didn't need to. One day, while visiting a small town in Japan, they found a mural painted on a school wall. It showed a man kneeling beside a crying woman backstage, the same moment that had started everything. Beneath it, in small letters, were the words, "Kindness is louder than fame." Sandra stood frozen, staring at it. They remembered, she whispered. Keanu's eyes softened. "No," he said gently. They understood. They spent the rest of that day at the school, meeting the children. One girl, around 10 years old, ran up to Keanu and handed him a folded paper heart. "This is for you," she said. "You helped my teacher when she was sad." He smiled softly. "I did." The girl nodded. "She watched your movie about kindness. She said it made her brave again." Keanu glanced at Sandra, who smiled quietly. "Looks like your silence keeps speaking," she said. Years passed. Time changed everything except their bond and the message they carried. Keanu grew older, gentler, even quieter. He acted less, lived more. Sandra continued to paint, to teach, to heal. Sometimes they met, sometimes they simply sent letters. But their hearts were always connected by the same invisible thread, the belief that good still exists. One afternoon, Keanu sat on a park bench watching children play. A young man approached him, shy and hesitant. "Are you?" he began. Keanu smiled. "Just someone sitting in the park." The young man laughed nervously. "I thought so. I just wanted to tell you something. When I was little, my mom used to read me stories from the quiet room. She said it helped her when she felt alone. Now I teach it to my students." Keanu's eyes softened. "That's beautiful." The man smiled. "Thank you for starting it." Keanu looked up at the sky, the sun warm on his face. "I didn't start it," he said quietly. "We all did." That night, he returned home and wrote a letter to Sandra. "Dear Sandra, I think it's time. The quiet room doesn't need us anymore. It's everywhere now, in hearts, in streets, in small acts of love. We started with tears, and the world turned them into light. I couldn't ask for more. Thank you for believing with me. Thank you for being the kind of person the world still needs." With peace, Keanu placed the letter in an envelope and smiled, knowing she would understand every word. The next morning, he went for a walk by the ocean. The waves moved slowly, the wind soft against his hair. Nearby, a small group of children were building something in the sand. As he got closer, he saw it was a tiny sand house with shells forming the words "The Quiet Room." One of the children looked up and said, "It's for everyone who feels sad. We made it so they can come and feel better." Keanu knelt beside them, smiling through tears. "It's beautiful," he whispered as he walked away. The sound of their laughter filled the air like music, and for the first time in years, Keanu felt a complete stillness inside him, a peace so deep it felt eternal. He had learned that true kindness doesn't need an audience. It only needs courage. And somewhere, far away, Sandra stood in front of one of her paintings, an open door glowing with soft light. She smiled, knowing that the message they began had outlived fame, outlived words, and outlived time itself, because the quiet room wasn't a place anymore. It was a way of living, a promise whispered from one soul to another, a gentle truth carried in every heart that chose love over pride, compassion over judgment, and peace over noise. And that, at last, was the legacy that melted every heart